Samach Gimel Amid Beis 63b, and the Gemara told us that the halacha is that any korban that is allowed to be and is valid at the Beis Hamikdash, and one didn't bring it and shechted outside of the Beis Hamikdash, that would count as a shchutei chutz, having shechted something outside of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Gemara was really questioning, what about the Sorah Mishalech, the goat that gets sent out? That's not really a korban, and is but nevertheless. So the Sarah Mishtaleach, the goat that's sent out, that isn't a korban that's brought at the Beis Hamikdash, but it has to be ra'ui, has to be worthy of being a korban. And does that count as shchutei chutz if somebody shechted out there? We had a drash for that. Now the Gemara asks, the drash for that is that it says Lashem, Mishu Michadim Lashem. Because it says Lashem, it's the ones that are specified to Hashem. And this is specified for Hashem, meaning it's a dedicated thing. So the Gemara says, V'Lashem Lahaitzihu, and this is about 8-10 lines from the top. V'Lashem Lahaitzihu, and the word LaHashem in the pasuk, that it's dedicated to Hashem, that's a limiting factor. That the goat is Roy Lashem. We have a contradiction to that. And the pasuk says that any goat that is, or lamb or bull that is born, and it has to be with its mother for 7 days, and on the 8th day and onward, it will be accepted as a korban, a fire offering to Hashem. So Yeratze lekarban yishel Hashem elu ishim, that that it is a fire offering, meaning under the age of 7, before in its first 7 days, it cannot be brought as a korban. It can be put on the fire as a fire offering. How do you know you shouldn't even sanctify it? And the word korban, it means that at the moment you sanctify it, it should already be worthy of a korban. So you can't sanctify it in that first week either. Lashem, and Lashem tells us that it includes the Sarah Mishaleh, that the goat that gets sent out, since it does come to the gate of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, it's brought in before the lottery. That's included, and the prohibition of the goat in the first week of its life cannot be the goat to be sent away into the desert. So you see that Lashem is inclusive, not limiting. So it says in each place, you look at the context to tell us whether it's inclusive or whether it is limiting. Hasam the El Pesach l'Rabbis, there it says, and to the house of Hashem, to the door of the house of Hashem, he didn't bring in, so meaning it should be brought l'Rabbis. It's inclusive to say anything that can come to the door, Lashem l'Haitzi. So then Lashem is limiting to that inclusiveness, where it says anything that's worthy of coming to the door, Lashem, for the purpose of Hashem. So that's a limiting factor. Hacha the Ishe Lahaitzi, there where it says that it's a fire offering, which is limiting anything that's going to go on the Mizbeach, then Lashem is L'Rabbis, so it's saying anything that goes onto the Mizbeach as a fire offering, or Lashem, or it's brought as a contribute as a dedication to Hashem. Okay, so now we get into, so that's where we know this idea. Now we're going to get into the question. The Torah said, what we just learned is that a korban, a bull, lamb, or goat within its first week of life cannot be dedicated to as a korban. fire offering to Hashem. And that tells us that it includes the Sarah Mishalech, the goat that's going to be sent away, that may not be dedicated within its first week of life. It has to be with its mother. But without this addition, I may have thought somehow that the goat that can be sent away would be allowed to be within its first week. What are you talking about? The Gemara is going to say, we know that it has to be worthy of a carbon. Why? Because you're going to do a lottery, and one of them is going to be chosen as a carbon. The other one is going to go out into the desert. How are you going to have a scenario where you have this carbon, this goat, within the first week of its life, that just because it's sent away to the desert, you're going to be able to take it as a non-carbon and send it away? It has to be at least there is a chance it's going to be a carbon, and so it has to be worthy of a carbon. So Gemara says, Taima. So the basis for your exclusion of the goat that's being sent away being within its first week of life, that it has the Rabbi Rahmana, because the Torah has this special additional word of Lashem. Kollel Rabbi Rahmana. If the Torah had not said so, Hava Amina, I may have thought that you can dedicate and sanctify the goat to go out and to be sent out into the desert, even within its first week of its life. It's still missing the time; it's not the right time yet, and nevertheless, it would be valid. Well, how can that be? But the girl, the lottery, is only going to be kivea, establish the one that's sent out. But if the goat at least is worthy, to be dedicated to Hashem. You can't tell me there's a lottery here between these two goats, and only one is available, and only one is valid as a korban. That's not a lottery. It's predetermined which one's going to be Lashem and which one is La'azazit. It has to be that both of them could be the korban, and then the lottery tells you which one's the korban and which one goes out to the desert. But if one of them is not valid to be a korban because it's still within its first week of its life, it's not yet in its 8th day, so it's mechusar zman. It's not allowed to be a korban, so that doesn't count as a lottery. Amar Rav Yosef, Amani Chanana Mitzri. So this must be the opinion of Chanana Mitzri. So now we're going to have two opinions of scenarios where the goat that is sent out does not require a lottery. And there I may have thought it can be within its first week of its life if it's not a korban, and that's why we need a special teaching to tell us that it has to be 8 days and on. Now, we're going to have two scenarios, two opinions, where it would be the goat sent out would be valid even though it was within its first week of life. What would that be? Up until now, we learned that if there was a mess up in one of the two goats, then you have to bring a whole new pair and do a new lottery. That was the way our Mishnah had it. We're going to have two opinions that say that no, that if one dies, if one becomes invalidated, the one that's the korban, Lashem, becomes invalidated or dies or spills or something happens, so you need a new pair. If when you already shechted the goat, the Lashem, and you have the korban there, and then the one that's supposed to go out Lazazel dies, you don't have to replace it with a new pair, but a single goat can be brought in, and it's predetermined. That's the one that's going to go to the desert. So the scenario, Hanan HaMitzri's opinion is the Tani we learn. Hanan HaMitzri Omer. Hanan, the Egyptian, said, "Afilu dam b'kos mevichaver mazavigo." You have two goats. You did the lottery. Goat A was chosen Lashem. So you shechted that one, and you have the blood in the bowl, and you're ready to spritz the blood. And then the goat that's supposed to go out Lazazel, that's Yom Chai, that's standing alive in the Beis Hamikdash, waiting for the moment that they're going to be taken out to the desert, it drops dead. That goat dies. So now you need to replace it. So up until now we saw you need to replace it by bringing a whole new set. Hanan Mitzri says, no, you will have one goat already there. Yeah, but it's already been shechted. So what? You pair up the one goat with the bowl of blood, even if the blood is in the bowl, that's sufficient to just bring a new one and match it up with that, and then it becomes its pair, and that's the one that's sent out. So now, when you're matching up this carbon, the goat that's going to be a pair, it's predetermined. That's the one going out to the desert. So I may have thought that one goat that's going out to the desert and predetermined that it's going out to the desert, there's no chance it's going to be the carbon because I have the carbon in the bowl. I have the blood of the goat that's the carbon already shechted in a bowl. So there, it would be valid to bring I may have thought it's valid to bring a goat even in its first week of life, and because it's not a carbon. Therefore, the Torah says that even anything that's brought Lashem, and even the Sarah Mishaleach, even the goat that's being sent out, must be 8 days and onward. So the Gemara says, "Amen." The Shabbos le l'Chanan HaMitzri. Where do we find this opinion of Chanan HaMitzri? The Leslie Dechuyin. We find that he doesn't. He says that you don't have something that became invalidated on account of the other one. So the blood, the goat that was shechted, the other one that died is not going to invalidate it. Yeah. Hagrola mishamisle. Do you really learn that he doesn't need a hagrola? It doesn't need a lottery. Maybe it's going to die and he's going to bring another girl, right? You really need to bring 2 goats. Chanan HaMitzri also says you're going to need to bring 2 goats, but you can continue with the blood of the first one, and you have to choose the 2. So Chanan HaMitzri also says you bring 2 goats, and they both have to be worthy of bringing a carbon, and then you put the lotteries on them, and the one that's Lashem, we don't have to use it because there's already a valid shechted one. And the one that's Lazazel is the one that goes out in the desert. So he's not disagreeing. He's not changing the idea that you need a lottery. Who tells you he doesn't need a lottery? All he's saying is that you still use the first goat's blood that was shechted as a valid carbon because you shechted it for the carbon and you have it in a bowl. You're waiting for its partner. But how are you going to get a partner for it? You're going to bring 2 goats and do a lottery on the 2. The one that says Lashem, you put it aside, and that's going to go to special pasture because it's not needed because you have the bowl of blood already from the first carbon. And the second one that is Lazazit. So you need, even according to Chanan HaMitzri, you would need perhaps a goat that is worthy of carbon, meaning it would have to be after 8 days from the 8th day on, not in its first week of life. And so, why do I need a special teaching to tell me that the goat that's sent out it must be after its first week? So that's not necessary. So it must be the second opinion that we have that says that there's a scenario where you don't need a lottery. The Tani will learn. Meis echad mehem. The Brisa taught that if one of the 2 goats dies, maybe chaveru shulei b'agrala. It just brings a second one and matches it up without a lottery, because this is already predetermined to be the one that the lottery determined. So either as the Lashem and the Lazazel died, you replace that, or the one that was dedicated as a carbon died, so you replace that, and it matches up with the previous one. And you don't need a hagrola, you don't need another lottery. Different Rabbi Shimon, that's what Rabbi Shimon says. So according to that opinion of Rabbi Shimon, I need a teaching to tell me that perhaps in that scenario, the goat that is predetermined to go out to the desert because we already have a lottery. So then that goat that replacing the goat, Sarah Mishalech, the goat's being sent to the desert, that the replacement doesn't have to be available as a carbon. So perhaps even a 3-day-old, 4-day-old goat would be valid. That's what it says. No, it's invalid. It has to be at least have been with its mother for the first time. Ravina says, I have another scenario where the goat replacement doesn't need a lottery. Kagain Shehuma, there were two goats. The one on the right was dedicated as the Karban Lashem, taken off to be shechted. The one on the left, dedicated as a goat to go be sent. The goat sent out into the desert, and it's standing there waiting. And then it got a mum, a blemish, and so we have to switch it out. And he's switching it out onto another korban, onto another goat to be sent out. Perhaps that one is also predetermined and is allowed to be within the first week. That's why we need the special teaching Lashem to tell us that no, even this, which is not going to be brought as a korban but sent out, also must be after its first week of life. So Gemara says, Ravina, how do you even know that the goat being sent out into the desert is invalidated by a blemish? It's not a korban, right? Just being sent out into the desert. Why would a blemish make a difference? The Tani we learned in the Brayso. It says in regards to blemishes, the ishe leisipnu mehem, and a fire offering you shall not bring of these of a blemished animal. Okay, fine. So fire offering, elu chalavet. These are the fats, the parts that go onto the altar. Ainli elakula, maybe all of it. How do you know that even some of it can't go on to the mizbeach, even one olive size of it? Talmud Leimar mayhem of them, even some of them. It can't go on. Mizbeach, upon the mizbeach, zuzrikas david, not only on the fire, but also spritzing of the blood of a blemished animal can't go on the mizbeach. Any part of the mizbeach. Then it says Lashem, l'Rabbi Sar Mishtaleach, and it can't be brought for Hashem. For anything for Hashem, even the goat being sent out can't have a blemish. So that's what the Torah says. Any fire offering on the Mizbeach, Lashem, all these may not be brought from the blemish. Now the Gemara says, I need both of these teachings. And I need a teaching to tell you that the goat being sent out is included in the prohibition of using a blemished animal. And I have to tell you that it's included in the prohibition of using an animal in the first week of its life, when it doesn't have enough time with its mother till it becomes permissible to be brought as a korban. The ikas of Rachman Mechusas, if the Torah had only said an animal that is within its first week also cannot be brought as a sar mishaleach, right? So now we have an atypical korban, right? It's not really a korban brought. So perhaps these prohibitions of an animal in its first week of life or a blemished animal don't apply here. So we have the Torah teaching us, no, it's included in the prohibition of an animal in the first week of its life may not be brought as a korban and also may not be sent out. If the Torah had only said that, I would say perhaps the first week of its life you can't bring it even as a goat to be sent away because the time hasn't come to be valid as a korban. But a blemished animal, the mati zimni, the time has come for it to be that it's allowed to be a korban. Ema light, perhaps that would not be limited, and you can bring a blemished animal as your goat being sent out. That's why I need a special teaching of the Torah saying that that the sar mishtaleach, the goat being sent out in the desert, is included in the prohibition. Because if the Torah had only said the prohibition in regards to the blemished animal, because perhaps that's a disgrace to bring an offering that has a blemish. But in its first week of life, nothing wrong with that. Right? It's not the animal is nice, cute, it's beautiful. There's no delay mos. It's not a disgrace. Perhaps the prohibition of not bringing a korban of an animal in its first week would not apply to Tzricha. That's why I need the Torah to say Lashem by both of them to tell you anything dedicated to Hashem as a korban or as a sar mishaleach goat being sent out applies to both of these prohibitions. It can't have a blemish, and it must be after its first week of life. Rava says, there's another prohibition of mechusar zman. Up until now, we're talking about the first week of its of its life. There's another mechusar zman. The Torah says, you're not allowed to bring a carbon of the mother and its child on the same day. Besides that the animal has to be under its mother for the first 7 days, and only on the 8th day onward, there's another mechusar zman, something that needs time. If the mother was shechted today, you can't shecht its young also today. Don't shecht the mother and its kid on the same day. So perhaps this is beyond the 8th day, but Rava says, where there's a mechusar zman, when I need to tell you the goat being sent out is it has a prohibition of mechusar zman, not within its first week, but perhaps when its mother was shechted that day. So go back to the Gemara's question. I don't need that teaching because it has to be worthy of a carbon. And if the mother was shechted that day, it wasn't worthy of a carbon. So Rava has an interesting idea. I have a scenario, he says, where at the beginning of the day, it was a valid carbon. And after the lottery was already done, it became an invalid carbon because the mother was shechted. Now, why would that be? Because the mother goat is not going to be it as a carbon. So in what way would the mother have been shechted? It's Yom Kippur. We can't just shecht an animal on Yom Kippur. It's like Shabbos. You can't shecht unless it's a mitzvah. So Rava has a scenario. You had two young goats that were brought in for the lottery. One was chosen Lashem, shechted already. The other is waiting to be sent out to the desert. And in the meantime, someone gets ill and they need to eat. And the doctor says that whatever they have, they need to eat fatty meat. And so they shechted the mother of this goat, the mom goat, as for the person that's sick, to give them what to eat. Now, all of a sudden, the mother of this goat is shechted, so now you can't shecht the kid. So this goat being sent out, not as a korban, but being sent out into the desert is a mechusar zman, because the mother was shechted today. Perhaps that is allowed to continue, because after all, it's not a korban. To that it says, no, you're not allowed to continue. You would have to replace it because the mother was shechted, so the young cannot be sent out. That's a type of shechting as well. Perhaps the scenario is that he had someone sick in the house, and they shechted the mother on Yom Kippur for this person that's sick. Okay, the Gemara says, wait, so what would be the problem? You're just sending it out into the desert. You're not shechting it. The young is just going to die. The Torah says, don't shecht the young on the same day as its mother. This doesn't count as shchita because it's pushing it off the side of a cliff. So in Eretz Yisrael, they said the yes, pushing it off the cliff counts as the halachic shchita, and it has that equivalent prohibition. And so therefore, we have the teaching over here. What scenario do we have where a mechusar zman on a goat would require a special teaching in the Torah to tell us that it's included in the prohibition, because even though that's not a carbon per se, it's being sent out into the desert, that has all the halachas of a carbon, and that the pushing it off the cliff counts as shchita, and therefore it's going to be prohibited because it's mechusar zman. The mother was shechted that day for a sick person. Okay, back to our Mishnah. The Mishnah said that you bring in the new pair of goats, and you say if the one that died was the one that was chosen as a carbon, so the one that's chosen as a carbon is the replacement, and the other one is an extra. And if the other way around, if the goat that's being sent out died, and I now have a replacement, then we have two carbon Hashem, the original one and the second one, and the one of them is going to be brought as a carbon, the other goes in the pasture, and we have a replacement. So now the Gemara says two opinions. Which one is actually going to be brought. Sheni shebezug rishon yikarev. The second of, meaning the other one of the first pair, is the one that's going to be brought. The original lashem is going to be brought, or sheni shebezug sheni, and the second one of the second pair, yireh, is going to go into pasture. However, Rabbi Yochanan says sheni shebezug rishon yireh, sheni shebezug sheni yikarev, that the first one is going to go into pasture, the second one is going to be brought into the right. So we now have two lambs dedicated as the korban, because we have two pairs. The first pair, one died, so we replaced that one. But now we have the second pair. We have two goats that are korban Hashem. One is going to pasture, one is going to be brought as a korban. Rav says the first one is brought as the korban, and Rabbi Yochanan says the second one is brought as a korban. But Mike and what's the basis of this machlokes? Rav says the first one never became invalidated because it's a living being. And a living being, a korban that's alive, does not become invalidated. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even though that it's a valid korban, even though it's alive, it can become invalidated. And when its partner died, it became invalidated. The new set are the new pairs, and the first one goes into pasture. My time of the Rav. So what's the basis of Rav that says that it doesn't become invalidated? He learns from every korban that today may not be brought, either in the first 7 days of its life, where it became invalidated and now became invalidated. It was never valid because the first 7 days of its life, it's not allowed to be brought. Right? So you say, look, if the first 7 days of its life can't be brought as a korban, that becomes invalidated. And obviously it doesn't, because on the 8th day, you're allowed to bring it as a korban. So you see that a live animal does not become invalidated permanently. Wouldn't you say, even though that right now it's not valid as a korban, when it becomes validated, meaning after 7 days, on the 8th day and onward, we're allowed to bring it as a korban, it's a valid korban. It's okay. So to over here, there's no difference. The animal was invalid now, and tomorrow becomes valid. There, it was never valid from the start. It was never a good korban because the first 7 days of its life, it can't be brought as a korban. That doesn't count as invalidated. It was never valid to begin with. However, over here, it was a valid korban, and then became invalidated because its partner died, and it became pushed away. Perhaps then it remains nidche once it's nirav and nidche once it was valid, and it became pushed away. And oil v'nidche, since it got pushed away, yidacha, it remains forever pushed away and invalidated. So rather, the teaching of Rav is like this: Yalaf mibalmu. He learns it from a blemish, a passing blemish. We know that a blemished animal may not be brought. What happens if it has a passing blemish? It has a blemish that will heal and heals and becomes valid again. Don't we say, even though that right now it's not a valid korban, hashta right now, ki hadar merzi, when it becomes validated again afterwards, shaper nami, it's a valid korban. Hachanami here too, leishna, it wasn't valid now. You bring the new pair, it's a valid korban again. And indeed, how do you know that a passing blemish does indeed become valid again once the blemish heals? It says, for its destruction, its blemish is within it. It is a mumbam, it has a blemish in it. Mumbam hudalayiratzim, which tells us only if the blemish is in it. Then it's not accepted as a korban of our muman. But if the blemish passed, it healed, now it's valid as a korban. Now it's accepted as a korban. Fine. So that's the teaching of Rav. Rav says we learn from there that even though that for momentarily it was invalidated because its partner, the other goat, died, it's valid again when they bring a replacement. Rabbi Yochanan says that it becomes invalidated and you have to bring only the new set. The Torah says by them it has a blemish, it has a destruction. Meaning by the blemishes, there's such a rule that once it heals, it's better. By the blemishes, when the blemish goes away, it becomes better. But that limiting to blemishes, but in any other invalidation, once it's invalidated, it remains invalid. Once it becomes invalidated, it remains pushed away, invalidated. Rav says, you know what the word behem over there teaches you? It's be'inaya when it is still there. But if it gets mixed in, then it will be okay. What does that mean? Because we learned in the Mishnah. They brought a korban as a they brought a korban and thinking that it's a valid korban, that it doesn't have a blemish. And after they shechted it, they have the parts on the table. They break it up into what it's supposed to be, and these parts are going to go on the mizbeach, these parts are going to be eaten by the kohanim, whatever it may be. And they look at it and like, oh my goodness, we missed this earlier. It has a blemish. It had whatever it was, a broken leg or whatever the blemish was. And so they now know that there's a blemished animal. At the same time, they brought another korban, and on the table there are parts of two korbanos. The blemished part, they know, but there's a mixture now of some parts that are, they don't know if it comes from the valid korban or the blemished korban. Say varim tamimim, limbs, parts of a valid korban. They varim that got confused, mixed up with parts of a blemished animal, which is invalid. So Rabbi Eliezer, right there, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion, in Karav Aroish, if one head was already brought, Shalechaman, onto the fire, onto the mizbeach, you can bring all the rest of the heads. Why? Because I'm going to say, oh, the one that already is on the mizbeach is the one that was the blemished one. And so all these are valid, and I can bring them. Kura'ov, Shalechaman, if one of the thighs, the legs of an animal was brought, so the rest of the karbanos, all of them can be brought. Even though you have a question, it's a Torah prohibition of bringing a blemished animal. How can you bring a suffix even in doubt? How can you bring the blemished animal on there? And to say, the one that's on the mizbeach already is the one. You can't say that. Maybe it's not, and then you're transgressing a Torah prohibition. So it must be that the Torah allowed this, and that's this teaching over here, that it has to be mashchasam bahem. It has to be that you know which one it is that's blemished, but if you don't know, if it's confused, it's mixed up in the rest, you're allowed to bring it. And therefore, as long as you can rely on something, you can somehow point to one and say, that's the blemished one, then the rest of them are allowed to be brought. The Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. And they say, even if many of them were already brought, and there's only one left, that's a matter of question of whether that's a blemished one or not, you're not allowed to bring it. It goes out into the Beis HaSreifa to be burned outside. In other words, they say that even in a matter of doubt of whether this one is the one that had a blemish, it's still not allowed to be brought. In any case, so according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, I need a teaching of mashchasam bahem in them, meaning you have to know that it has a blemish. And the other one learns it from the fact that the Torah switched its terminology. It said there's a destruction within them, bahem, their blemish is in them. So behem went from behem to bum. That change is to tell you this teaching. Says, no, that's not enough of a reason for a drash. But they both agree to that teaching of Rabbi Eliezer would come from this pasuk. Now, so the Gemara just had the machlok as the basis for Rabbi Eliezer and for Rabbi Yochanan and for Rav. Rav says, hey, a blemished animal that became invalidated, then it heals, becomes valid again. So to over here, it became invalidated, it became valid again. So therefore, bring the first one. The Gemara said, what are you talking about? Nehi the nami the balechai ben nidachim. Fine, we'll accept you or your teaching, right? That what was valid once didn't become invalidated forever. It became invalidated, and once you have a partner for it, it's valid again. But now I have two. What makes you say take the first one? Maybe you should take the second one. Ibai high nakriv. Let him up to choose. Let the Kohen Gadol choose whichever he wants. Why are you telling him that he has to take the first one? Amar Rabba, Rav Sabalak Rabbi Yossi. So Rabba says, like we saw a couple of days ago, that Rav follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. The Amar mitzvah barisha, the mitzvah is to have the first animal. How do we know that the first carbon is the best one to do? Which Rabbi Yossi? Where do we see this? So this is exactly the same Gemara we saw a couple of days ago. We can do this a little quicker. Inema Rabbi Yossi the kupas. Is it of the deposit boxes for the tzedakah? Where we learned the Tanam, we learned shalosh kupas or shalosh ayisayim. There were the collection boxes were 3 boxes. Each one had 3 sa, and this way people would donate for the Beis Hamikdash. Shabehan Karmen Salishka, where they would give the teruma, the donation, and they would take from there for what's needed. Because of Alein Aleph Beis Gimel, and it said 1, 2, 3 Aleph Beis Gimel. Matanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi explained the Brisa teacher. Lama Kasam Alein Aleph Beis Gimel. Why do we need a number on them? Just take the money from whichever one. Lay days and handed to Rabbi Rishon. I tell you, whichever one was donated first, you're going to take first. Lahavi Amen or Rishon, you're going to bring the carbon from there first. Why Shem Mitzvah Barishon? Because the mitzvah is first. With the one that was donated first. The Gemara says, "Don't shiny hasam to be in this ischazi kamaisel ischazi basarasa." Maybe over there specifically, because at the time that the first one was donated, the second one was not even a donation yet. So the first one was valid and worthy of carbon earlier, but over here they're both valid and worthy at the same time. Ella Rabbi Yossi the Pesach. So it must be Rabbi Yossi that we learned in regards to carbon Pesach. The Tani we learned in a brisa. Hamafresh Pesach. Somebody dedicated a carbon Pesach, a lamb, va'avad, and he lost the lamb. And he then separated and dedicated a second lamb as its carbon. And then he finds the first one. So now it's Erev Pesach in the afternoon. He's looking at 2 lambs. Which one should he bring as a carbon? The one originally donated or dedicated, or the second one, which when he lost the first one, he dedicated. Now they found it. They're both there in front of it. Divrei Chachamim. The Chachamim say, yeah, you got a choice. You can bring whichever you want. Rabbi Yossi says mitzvah barisha. The mitzvah is in the first one. So we see that Rabbi Yossi holds that always you're going to follow the first one, unless, and now we go to Samach Dalet on the base, unless the second one is a prime, is a better carbon, you're going to bring that as your carbon. Somebody had a question? Our Mishnah seems to indicate, like Rav, that you would bring the first one. And there's a brisa that indicates like Rabbi Yochanan. Our Mishnah seems like Rav, because we learned Im shel shein meis. If the one in our Mishnah it says, if the one that was dedicated for Hashem died, zeshal of agor Hashem yiskayim. The new pair, the one that's dedicated to Hashem, is the one that's going to be Iskayim Tachtav, is in its place. The Idach and the other, it stands as is. So from the fact that it says it stands as is, indicates that it became the original one, remains the valid one. So you see in our Mishnah that the original one is the one that's going to be brought. Brisa Kavasei Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that indicates like Rabbi Yochanan, because we learned Sheni, Eini Yadei Sheni Shebezug Rishon, Sheni Shebezug Sheni. And it says the second one, I don't know which second one, the alternate of the first set, which is still valid, or the alternate of the second set, which is still valid. If It says it will stand alive, and not if its pair died. If its pair died, it's not going to be valid. And how do we know that? Me'ei mashma, from where do you see in this text that it stands alive, that its partner also has to have been alive and not died? Yamat chayv eloisha kvar amad. It has to. It's made to stand, which is present, future, and not amad, not previous, that it was valid before. All right, let's leave it over here. The Gemara is going to go into what happens if the blood spills. We'll see that tomorrow. Yeshikach, have a great day.
Yeah, you make it a great day.